Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on executive functions in the early years. It's so fabulous to see so many of you online today. We've had a fantastic sign-up rate for this webinar. Lots and lots of people interested in executive function in the early years. And it's a topic so close to my heart, so I can't wait to jump into our slides and let you know what I know about executive functions in the early years and introduce you to our fun characters to embody executive function skills. So I can't wait to do that, and I'm looking forward to getting started. In the meantime, I'd like you to introduce you to an audience member. So we have Pranell Pillay, who is in the audience with us. So she's going to be dropping some useful resources into the chat, some links to some of the things that you will see on the screen that you might want to take a look at, then to support you further if you're interested in any of our services. So please do keep an eye out for her messages coming through. They are legitimate, they are from Connections in Mind, and that's Pranell Pillay. Pranell, it's lovely to have you with us. Super. So without further ado, I think I'll get started. Fantastic. So I hope you can all see my screen. So just a little bit of housekeeping on this, just to say that we are going to be covering understanding about prefrontal cortex and executive functions, looking at differences in executive functioning and discovering strategies and next steps. Going to be looking at those characters and how it can support the development of executive function. So our presentation is interactive, so you can use the QR code here, or you can also click on a link, which I should have got. So let me just grab that link quickly, because that was my preparation. I should have made sure that I had that ready. So let me just copy that, and I'm going to head back over to our presentation. There we go. So let me just pop that into the chat for us, if I can find my chat bar. Where has it gone? Here it is. There we go. So you should be able to get that in the chat right now and click on that link. I can see 12 people have done it. There we go. 12 people have done it through the QR code, and the rest of you are coming in on the link. That's fantastic to see. We'll keep popping that link back in there because that will help us for the people who are joining us later. Now, we have got way more than 30 people that I can see online in the audience. So if you are in the audience and you haven't clicked on the link yet, please do. It helps you to get involved in the interactive elements of this presentation and means that I will be speaking to the knowledge in the room rather than just a general idea of what people might know and what people might be interested in. So please do get involved with that. So we're going to be doing presentation for about 35 to 40 minutes, and then there'll be some time for a Q&A. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, just jot them down and we will get to Q&A at the end. Fantastic. So I am first of all interested to know which key stage do you work with if you're working in schools? If you're not working in schools, that's fine as well. I'm just interested to find out a little bit about the distribution here. So of course, this is a webinar about early years. So I'd expect the majority of you to be early years, but it's interesting to see that some of you are working across the age groups as well. Some even into Key Stage 3, which is secondary school if us in the UK. And if you're calling from outside of the UK, early years is for us in the UK is from about 2 up until 5 when they start school. Then we have Key Stage 1, which goes to around 8, and then we have Key Stage 2, which goes up to about 11. So that can help you to understand that. So a lovely distribution there, but lots of people, of course, working in early years. So that's fantastic. So a little bit of an introduction to me and why I'm here speaking to you today about executive functions in the early years. My name is Victoria Bagnall, and I'm one of the co-founders of Connections in Mind. I'm also neurodivergent. I have a diagnosis of dyslexia, but despite that, I did manage to get to the University of Cambridge to read geography, and I'm a qualified secondary geography teacher. I'm also a mother of 3 gorgeous girls. I have a 14-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 6-year-old, all neurodivergent and all wonderfully different in their own ways. As I said, I'm the co-founder of Connections in Mind and also an organisation called The Code, which offers executive function aware tutoring. Also, I don't have this on the slide because I need to update this slide actually. But I'm also the trustee of an organisation called the Learning Skills Trust, and advisor for the Divergent Schools Group. I'm also setting up a professional body for executive function coaching. And I've written a book, which is called The Neuroinclusive Educator, which will be out at the end of this academic year, which covers a lot of the things that we'll be covering today and more. So it's wonderful to be here with you all today. So I always like to start these talks by just giving you a little bit of an understanding as to why I'm so passionate about this subject. So I want to talk to you about my light bulb moment, the moment when I found out about executive functions and everything that I had struggled with in my life kind of came into focus, but it also helped me to understand a lot of the people that I was supporting in my work as a teacher as well. So I want to talk to you about my light bulb moment so that maybe some of you will have your own light bulb moment in the audience today, but also so you understand why I'm so passionate about it. So because I'm neurodivergent, I got a lot of negative feedback from the world around me as I was growing up, that I was lazy, disorganized, and how could I be so intelligent but just struggle with so many of the basic things that life required of me. And that really impacted my mental health to the extent that in my early adulthood, I really suffered with depression and anxiety to the extent that I experienced suicidal ideation as well. And I'm glad to report that since I found out about executive functioning and I had my light bulb moment, I haven't been down that road again. And that's because I now have a much better understanding of why I find some things difficult and other people don't. And I don't compare myself to other people. I recognise that I am wonderfully, brilliantly, uniquely Victoria Bagnall, exactly the person I'm supposed to be. And I celebrate my individuality rather than comparing myself to other people. And it was the light bulb moment happened for me when I was working alongside a young lady who got the highest ever score in the thinking skills assessment for Oxford University. So I think we'll all agree that she was pretty bright. But she really struggled with the mechanics of her learning, like writing essays and handing in her homework and revising for tests and organising her files and turning up for lessons on time. All of these things. I think this book kind of perfectly describes her as smart but scattered. She was very intelligent but very chaotic in her approach to her learning. And I was supporting her as she was taking her A levels from hospital because she'd been hospitalised because of her mental health to keep her safe. And it was in hospital that I was speaking to her psychiatrist, and I just said I couldn't understand how someone so intelligent could struggle with so many of these basic things. And the psychiatrist said to me, Victoria, I think you ought to read this book. It's called Smart But Scattered Teens, and I think it will help you to understand her better. So I read this book and I was just like, oh my goodness, this is exactly this young lady. But also, it was describing me as a younger person too. And it helped me to understand all the things that I had struggled with, that I had so much negative feedback about throughout my life, and helped me to understand that through a different lens. So, because my neurodivergent brain is quite impulsive, I finished the book and then looked online and found the next training that Peg Dawson was doing, which was in Boston in the USA, jumped on a plane, went to her training and took her out for lunch and said, Peg, I love what you're doing. This is absolutely incredible. We need what you know in England. Will you come to London? And that was 10 years ago now, in 2015. And since then, we've been on this incredible journey of learning about executive functions and developing our work at Connections in Mind. And our organisation is based on the understanding that if we educate people about how their brains work, it helps them to be kinder to themselves, but also those around them. So at Connections in Mind, we know that our work is literally life-changing and that it has the ability to change the world. So we've got very high aspirations for our work, but I really do hope that some of you will have a life-changing experience as part of this webinar today. So at Connections in Mind, we offer one-to-one coaching, executive function coaching, and also PA support for people with executive function challenges. We offer training, like these talks that I'm doing for free today, but I do them going into schools and organisations as well as a huge library of psychologist-approved resources, which are fantastic for supporting development of executive functions, some of which we're going to be showing for you today. And we also have an incredible community of people and professionals, teachers, coaches, parents who are all supporting each other in our work at working towards a more neuro-inclusive future where we celebrate everybody's differences rather than making people feel bad about their brains and how they work. So we're going to start off by looking at executive function. And executive function is a term that is associated with all of these different diagnoses. So we have ADHD, we have autism, we have Tourette's, depression, anxiety, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, dyslexia, all of these different diagnoses have links in the academic literature to executive functioning. So that's really kind of an underlying or co-occurring difference that we're looking at in terms of executive function. These slides have got out of order. That should have come first. I don't know what happened there. So I would like to know, what is your knowledge of executive function? So have you heard of that term before? Given that you signed up for a webinar about executive functions, I expect most people have. But I'd like to know, would you consider yourself to be more of an expert, or would you consider your knowledge to be more emerging? So let me know. Interesting. Okay. Very, very interesting graph. It's interesting that the more people we have doing this, the more kind of a normal curve it gets into, because kind of most populations fit into a normal curve. So we have most people around the middle and some people towards the top end, some people towards the bottom end. But really interesting to see like that breadth of knowledge that we have in the audience. So that's wonderful. So Panna, I'm sorry you can't work Menti. That's okay. That's fantastic. Don't worry, you don't have to participate on Menti if you can't make it work, but it's lovely to see your comments coming through. So, executive functions are the cognitive processes associated with the prefrontal cortex of the brain. So that's the bit of our brain behind our foreheads. And they're called executive functions because they are responsible for the effective and timely execution of tasks and regulation of emotions and behaviour. So it's about executing tasks, about getting things done. That's what executive function is all about. And every single human on this planet has a unique executive function fingerprint. Okay, so every single person is different in terms of their executive functioning. And also, depending on how stressed or tired or hungry we are, that also impacts our executive functioning too. So at Connections in Mind, we recognise that in the science, there are three core brain functions that are talked about to be executive function. We've got our working memory, our inhibitory control, and our cognitive flexibility. So those are the three brain functions, what the brain is actually doing. It's not little drawers in our prefrontal cortex, but that's what the prefrontal cortex is responsible for. But in society generally, we haven't got brain scanners, so we can't kind of see what's going on in terms of the development of the prefrontal cortex. But what we can see and what we can measure as a society is we're very good at measuring skills. And that's what people do in schools all the time, and measure people's skills and help them to develop skills. That's what education is all about. So you can see here we've got a list of different executive function skills, all that require the optimal functioning of the prefrontal cortex in order to be good at these skills. So let me just go through a couple of them now. We've got goal-directed persistence. Now, goal-directed persistence is the same as resilience or grit, okay? And that requires us to use our working memory to remember what we're working towards. And then we need our inhibitory control, not to get distracted and go off and do something that's easier or more fun. And then we need our cognitive flexibility for when the inevitable obstacles come to light. And we have to think of a different way to reach the same goal. So we need all three of these executive functions in order to be resilient, to have this goal-directed persistence. Then we've got task initiation. So task initiation is the skill which is the opposite of procrastination. So procrastination, we struggle to get started on things. Task initiation, we get started on things in a timely fashion. So in order to have good task initiation skills, you need to remember what you're going to work on. You need the inhibitory control not to get distracted and go off and do something else. And you need the cognitive flexibility to switch from the task you were doing first to the new task that you're initiating. And so you can see how you need those brain functions. I'm going to give one more now, one that we really struggle with in the early years, which is totally developmentally appropriate, is our emotional regulation. So lots of young people struggle with their emotional regulation. And that's in order to regulate our emotions, we need our working memory to remember what's happening to us or to record what's happening to us and how we're feeling. We need our inhibitory control not to act on our emotions. And then we need our cognitive flexibility to shift and change the way that we are responding to our emotions to something that's more helpful to us and something that's unhelpful or harmful to us or other people. So you can see how we need all three of these brain functions to have good emotional regulation. So at Connections in Mind, we work with the 3 brain processes and 11 associated skills. So I want to know, which of these challenges do you struggle with? Which of these things do you find hard? So these are all associated with our executive functioning. So we've got meeting deadlines. We've got prioritizing work to be completed. We've got regulating our emotions. We've got inhibiting our responses. That means stopping ourselves from doing things we instinctively want to do. Then we've got organizing our belongings or keeping things tidy. Organizing our thoughts on paper. That's writing letters or essays or emails. Holding information in our head, that's our working memory. Keeping time, like punctuality, our ability to estimate time. And then finally, thinking flexibly, our ability to shift and change our thinking. So I want to know, which of these ones do we struggle with in the audience? Very, very interesting. About half of you have done this now, so a few more people coming in. But we can see in a big group, we've got about just under 100 people online and just under 60 people contributing. But we can see in a big group that is a really even distribution of executive function skills across the population. And we see this time and time again in the work that we do, that in a big group of people, not that we all struggle with the same things, because everyone is different and everyone struggles with different things. Everyone has different skills. We know that according to people's maths abilities and their abilities to speak languages or play tennis. But it's the same with these things that maybe we might previously have thought of as character flaws. Actually, they're skills, and they can be developed just in the same way as learning French or learning to play tennis or riding a bike. Really interesting to see holding information coming out top. That's our working memory. And that's really strongly linked to our estrogen levels. So if we menstruate, that impacts our estrogen levels. And so at certain times of our cycle, estrogen levels are particularly low. But also as we age and we approach menopause, estrogen levels drop off as well, and that impacts our ability to use our working memory too. So it's very interesting to see that. I don't know what age group or whether we menstruate in the audience. I'm going to make a guess. There's probably quite a large proportion of us that do. So that's very, very interesting to see that coming up. Okay, that one we've already done. Super. So I would like to ask you now, some of these have come out of order and I don't know why they have, but I'll come back to that one. So I'd like to ask you, first of all, what emotions did you feel last time you struggled? So what did you feel last time you struggled with the things on the previous slide? So we've got stress, someone said. Okay, very, very interesting. Okay, just under half or just over half of people have filled this out. And we can see very, very clearly that there's two kind of top words that are coming out, frustration and frustrated. If they were together, they'd be the biggest word. Then we've got shame, stress, anxiety, overwhelm, confused, further disordered, anxiety, upset, useless, disappointed, angry, annoyed, overwhelmed, fed up, unheard, fearful, low, really challenging emotions that we feel when something that is very natural and normal as a human, we all struggle with our executive functions to some extent, happens to us. It's really interesting. And this word cloud is something that I use in all the trainings that I do because I think it's really powerful. And every single time frustration comes out top. And I got very curious about that. So, oh, why does frustration come out top? Let me learn a bit more about frustration. And I found in the research that frustration is a secondary emotion. And actually, the emotion that we're feeling when we feel frustration, most of the time, that emotion we're feeling, the primary emotion is shame, that we're feeling ashamed of ourselves, and that makes us frustrated. And I think when we really feel deeply about these things, you can really think and reflect, yes, actually, it is that feeling of shame that I'm feeling, not for everyone, but for the majority of us. So my next question is, what is the root cause of these feelings? Where does it come from? Because when we're born, we are hungry and we cry out for milk. We don't have any executive functions. Our bodies don't have any inhibitory control. And so we do that, but we don't feel ashamed that we cry out for milk. We learn that. So from the demands of work, yes, to some extent, yeah. What else? Where else does it come from? From our upbringing, 100%. Yeah. Yeah. My need to complete things and please people. Yes, people pleasing something we absorb from it, and it's from a force, from an influence on us. Taking too much on, tiredness, social factors. Okay, we're getting to it now, and I can see someone's got it here. It comes from social expectations. Our society is embedded with unconscious bias against executive function challenges. It sees executive function challenges as something that is shameful, that's something we need to hide, something that is innate, that everyone should have. And if we don't have them, we're not trying hard enough, or we're lazy, or we're just not a good enough human being. And we shame people when they don't have strong executive functions. But as we've just proven on this previous slide, we all struggle with executive functioning. And so it's very curious to me that we have a society where we teach we teach young people in their formative years to feel ashamed of themselves because of their humanity. And it's done in a good way, like it's done in a not a good way, but in a we mean well is what I mean. We mean well when we're doing it. We're trying to avoid them becoming bad people or having a poor character. But actually, the research shows that the shaming doesn't help develop executive function skills because they're skills. And what helps to develop executive function skills is the same as developing any type of skill, is that compassionate support and guided support and learning. But shaming someone, you would never shame someone into learning tennis. You wouldn't expect that to help them to learn tennis or to ride a bike. So we need to revisit the way that we develop executive function skills in order to level the playing field for everyone. And remembering that if you really struggle with your executive function skills, these feelings of frustration that we feel are almost crippling. And I know that from my experiences from those years of suicidal ideation and deep depression, that they are debilitating when we feel these feelings of shame. And when we can flip the narrative, we can change that into a much more positive narrative. Instead, now, most of the time, and I do sometimes slip back into the shame piece, I'm not, and it's not, I'm not completely healed, as I would say, but most of the time I'm able to be much more self-compassionate now and just lean into my curiosity and my intrigue and just be kind of fascinated. Why does that happen again? What has happened to me? And to understand that often it's because I'm tired or stressed or there's too much on my plate, and to be just more gentle with myself about it. And in those moments, I can then find ways to do things better. But if I'm wallowing in a pit of shame and self-pity, then there's no way that I can find a way to way out of that. So it's really, really important that we support young people to develop skills, executive function skills, rather than shaming them. So what we know from the literature is that people struggling with their executive functions need compassion and not shame. Okay, that's really, really clear. The best way to develop executive functions is not to shame people, not to call them out in front of their peers, not to put them in detention, not to make them write lines, but actually is to sit down with them and compassionately help them to develop the skills to meet our expectations. So in summary, executive functions are brain processes found to be associated with the prefrontal cortex. They help us to get things done, and everyone has executive function skills, strengths, and challenges. There are 11 executive function skills, and society judges and shames people's executive function skills challenges. So I'm just going to do a few slides on the mechanics of executive function now, just to help us understand that it is more complicated than just developing a skill in a linear fashion. There are some complexities in there as well. So I want to just remind ourselves, what's the primary function of our brain? Why has it evolved to be there in our heads? What's its primary role? It's not a trick question. Okay. Absolutely. Yes, we're bang on. It is survival. So our brain's primary function, our primary role is to keep us alive. Yes, we now live in a very safe society where there aren't threats every minute of the day to our mere existence. But when we evolved in environments that were very hostile, and there was other humans and predators and other risks in the environment that meant that we had to be on high alert and making sure, constantly scanning the environment for any type of threat. And we needed to instinctively respond as soon as we possibly could to any threat in order to stop ourselves from perishing. And so that's the primary function of our brains. It's not algebra. It's not higher order thinking and philosophy. It's not learning to play tennis. It's all about survival. That's what our brains are primed for. We need to remember that. And we have these two core areas of our brain. So we have our prefrontal cortex. So that's the bit of our brain that's associated with our executive functioning. It's like our air traffic control center for our brain. It's where we think before we act. Okay, we're able to think before we do something. But then we have our amygdala, and our amygdala's job is to scan all of the information coming in from our environment and look for patterns of where there's been a threat in the past, and then have an immediate signal, an immediate response to keep us safe to that. And so that's where we act before we think. Okay, so we've got these two essential parts of the brain that we need to understand. And we have this cool hand model of the brain as well. So our hand model of the brain is such a useful tool to use with young children. So let me show you how this works. If you put your hand up like this, as you can see me in the screen, and fold your thumb across the palm of your hand, you'll find there's a knobbly bit of your thumb that sticks out. That's your amygdala. Then you've got your cortex and your prefrontal cortex. So eventually you've got your whole brain state, which is like this. So amygdala, cortex, prefrontal cortex. So now when we've got our whole brain state, when we're relaxed and we're feeling safe, then we can access our prefrontal cortex and we can do all that higher order thinking, planning things, managing our time, making decisions, and regulating our emotions and all those things. Now, if our amygdala senses any type of threat, whether real or perceived, the instinctual response is to disconnect the prefrontal cortex, because that is superfluous to the requirements right now, and redirect all of the energy within our brain into our self-preservation. Okay, and there's various different ways the brain can do that. We'll come on to that in the next slide. But it can take literally milliseconds for this to happen, for the amygdala to prioritize those instinctual responses. But it takes on average, once the amygdala feels safe again, it takes on average about 20 minutes for that to happen. Okay, so quite a long time for it to come back online, because it's not required if we need to be on high alert. Okay, so we have something called the body budget, and the body is always kind of regulating where to put the energy that's best use for our body. So these are the types of responses we can have when we're in that flipped lid state. We can fight, we can have a flight, we can run away, we can freeze where we kind of still. We can also flop to the floor. Well, when in the early years, when you've got all the different coloured cups, and Sally wanted the blue cup, but she got the green cup, and she can fall to the floor in complete emotion because it is just too much for her to cope with, that she didn't get what she wanted. That is that kind of flop response. We don't tend to see it so much in older age groups. Because of the kind of social expectations that we have, but you do see it in terms of fainting as well. When people faint, they completely lose control of their body and fall to the floor, and that's fainting. But we do also have another response, which often people misconstrue for using shame being an effective way of controlling and getting people to comply. We have this fawn response. So fawn is where you comply with whatever's threatening you. So in order to keep yourself safe, your brain instinctively knows that it just has to comply with whatever you're being told. So if you're being shouted at, you do what you're being told because you're under so much threat that your body knows that it's best to just comply. That's why, you give over your wallet when you're being mugged rather than holding it back, because you know that you're more likely to stay alive if you hand it over. So that's that fawn response. Now, this happens more often than we are all probably aware. So whenever we kind of raise our voice to a child, or we use shame, then they have these fawn responses where they kind of snap into line and they kind of good as gold, and they do that people pleasing. Now, that might seem effective for what we want to achieve, but what's not happening is they're not using their whole brain state to do the thing. They're relying on the adults to scold them into compliance to do things. So they're not developing those self-regulation skills when we're doing that. So whilst it might be effective to get things done in the short term, in the longer term, they're not learning those executive function skills when we use that. And also, it's not a very nice way to interact with each other. It's not something we'd want to endorse, that kind of behaviour of them, managing people when they grow up or anything like that. So actually, we need to think carefully about using that fawn response to our own ends. People always ask me, well, when do they develop? And, because we are all diverse and we all have different ways of thinking, feeling, and being, then there isn't a linear kind of, this skill comes online then. And it really depends on our environment, who's guiding us, who's supporting us. But there are some averages. So here are some of the averages. So in our early years, we can expect people to be coming into our setting with emerging working memory, cognitive flexibility, and response inhibition. So that working memory piece, we know that object permanence, which is something, of course, we're very familiar with if we work in early years, that young people can recognize that an object is a physical thing, and it stays in permanence. It doesn't disappear as it leaves the eyesight. Whereas up to about 6 months, a child doesn't have that awareness. Okay, so that object permanence is that kind of emerging working memory. Excuse me. Sorry, apologies. Then we have when they're coming, kind of emerging from early years and into primary school, we have our emotional regulation or emotional control developing, sustained attention and flexibility. And that's about right if you think about it. As when you're heading into reception, year 1, year 2, so when you're 5, 6, 7, you're able to kind of sit still on the carpet, to pay attention to a task for about 20 minutes, be able to shift between different tasks. on average. Okay, but as we well know, practitioners working in this space, not all the children can do that. And that's because they haven't learnt those skills yet. It doesn't mean there's any kind of character flaw or that their brain is broken in any way and needs to be fixed. It's just that their skills haven't developed yet, and we can support the development of those skills. And then what's really interesting is those, secondary school skills like task initiation, starting homework, planning and prioritizing our homework, organizing our files. Those are the kind of things we need at secondary school. And then it's not until we've left school, left university, and probably on our second or third job that our time management, goal-directed persistence, and metacognition fully develop. So it really does take a long time for the human brain to fully develop. Not till we're in our late 20s does it fully develop. So a lot of the things that we are able to do as adults, young children aren't able to do. And we know that in the early years, but I think we often forget it in kind of primary schools and secondary schools as well. And I'm going to now talk to you a little bit about how we can develop those executive function skills in the early years so that children have a level playing field, that they've all got access to these skills. But we also need to remember that they may flip their lids and not have access to their prefrontal cortex where their executive functions are. And that distressed behaviour needs to be met with compassion to bring that prefrontal cortex back online. If we shame a child, it just keeps their prefrontal cortex offline, and they're less able to do those things. So making sure we're using compassion to bring that back online through co-regulation is essential. So let's have a look at some case studies here. So we've got James. So this is little James, and he has response inhibition and flexibility challenges. Eva takes the toy that James is playing with, and James feels it's unfair and snatches it back. Eva does not want to give it up. James loses control of his behaviour and he hits Eva, even though he knows he shouldn't. So this is very common, isn't this, in early years, happens all the time. That the children are overwhelmed by their emotions, and they get into squabbles, especially over sharing things. And this is all to do with response inhibition, flexibility, emotional regulation. Then we've got Sarah here. So Sarah has emotional regulation and flexibility challenges. She wanted to have the blue cup, but she was given the green one. This is the example that I talked about earlier. She sinks to the floor in a dysregulated state. Adults don't want to give her what she wants for fear of reinforcing the behavior. They feel that if we give her the green cup, that we will teach her that when she wants something, she just sinks to the floor to get it. Now, that is one way of thinking about it. It's a very behaviorist way of thinking about it. Instead, I would encourage people to, in that moment, give her the green cup, if that's the one that the blue cup, if that's the one she wanted, in that moment, because that's what she's communicating to you in that moment, that she really wanted that blue cup. But also it's worth then working with the whole class or the whole group around how to manage our emotions when we don't get the thing that we want, okay, and helping to build up her skills to do that so that the next time she's better equipped to be able to regulate her emotions with that. So it's very difficult to try and work on these things in the moment because you're dealing with a dysregulated brain where the prefrontal cortex is not able to access, is not able to be accessed. So in the moment, you can't work on these things, but you can preempt and you can help build skills to avoid these situations. This is Nita. So Nita struggles with emotional regulation, response inhibition, and flexibility. And she finds drop-offs really hard. She clings onto her mum's legs and seems to settle well after she's left. And she's happily engaged at nursery and is making good progress. So there's just this difficulty with that shift from the home setting and being close to mummy and having mummy around to being in the nursery setting that is really, really challenging for Nita. And it's that shift that is hard. Again, what we can do is work with the whole cohort of young people about how to shift, how to change, what it feels like, how to manage our emotions around changing and changing environments, so that Nita begins to feel, okay, this is something that everyone struggles with to some extent. Whilst the other children might not struggle at drop-off, maybe they struggle at other shifts and changes. And that can help her to develop those skills over the longer term in a very collaborative way. Then we've got Leon. So Leon is a little bit older. He's kind of in reception. So he didn't kind of attend in the early years specifically, but he has joined in reception. So he's struggling with sustained attention, goal-directed persistence, and response inhibition, and they have a positive reinforcement policy at his setting. So he starts trying really hard to please the teacher, but because he's trying really hard, means that his behavior is at a level of everyone else that's kind of not really trying very hard. He never gets the star of the week because his effort can't be seen. And then he starts feeling misunderstood and othered. And then he stops trying because it's just too much effort. And then his behavior deteriorates to probably the level it would have been if he hadn't been trying so hard. But also his nervous system adapts to seek out the connection that he needs from the adults, that recognition, that star of the week, by acting out. Because when he acts out, when he's naughty, he gets connection from teachers. Maybe not the kind of nicest form of connection because he's being told off or put back on task or being sent to the corner or whatever it is, but he does get their attention and connection. And so I often see when we see these naughty behaviors, it's often a cry for connection, that child is really wanting to connect with the adults in the environment. So when we shift our thinking and we help meet that need of the lack of connection with more connection, we can start shifting away from that naughty behavior towards more regulated behavior. So I just want to finish off this little presentation today by introducing our executive function animals. You can see them lurking around on the screen here. We've got on here Stop Spot, we've got Eve the owl, we've got Tick Tock Timmy, and we've got Memorizing Marvin. And I'm going to show you all of our little characters on the next slide, and we'll go through some of their stories. So here they all are. There are 11 of them, which align with our 11 executive function skills. And I'm going to talk you through some of them. And as I'm talking, you can see if you can guess which executive function skill they might be associated with. So let's go with the Get Going Gang first. So the Get Going Gang are ants. And they are always super busy and they really don't ever struggle with getting started with things. So they are for task initiation. So they have this amazing ability to get on with everything, super busy all the time. Then we have Stop Spot. So Stop Spot is a dog who used to jump up at people all the time and get them muddy and tear their clothes and push little kids over. And he learned that actually it wasn't really great, that he was harming other people with his behavior, and he really wanted to change. So he learned to stop and before he was doing things that he was excited about and communicate his excitement in different ways. And so Stop Spot is our one for response inhibition. Then we've got Tick Tock Timmy. So Tick Tock Timmy is a cockerel, and he is in charge of making sure all the animals on the farmyard are up and at him at sunrise. So of course he is for time management. I'm not going to go through all of them, but let's finish off with See It Through Sam because it's the children's favourite one. See It Through Sam is a dung beetle. Now, See It Through Sam is very, very resilient because he has this massive ball of dung, which is many hundred times the size of his body. But he uses his strong front legs to keep pushing this ball of dung along over the rocks and up the hills and round the obstacles to reach the place that he wants to get to. So he is goal-directed persistence or resilience there. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but as you can see, these are our characters and they're available to purchase on our website. And I think Pranal is going to pop the link into the chat so that you can have a look at those. But they are fantastic resources. Each of the characters comes with the story that I have just talked about, and that's in form of a presentation that you can use in your setting to talk about the story, to talk about the kind of moral behind the story, and each one is kind of characterized by an animal that young people should be familiar with already, so that can help them to kind of visualize them, I should say. And what we do in our classroom settings is we say to young people, okay, so which of our characters are we going to need to help us with this difficult task? So let's say we've got to tidy up before lunch. Okay, so which of the characters are going to need? Okay, we're going to need the get going gang to help us to get started. We're going to need focused Freddy to keep us focused on the task in hand. We're going to need TikTok Timmy to keep a timer and make sure we're getting it all done in time before lunch. And we're going to need Stop Spot because we might get a bit distracted and want to go off and do something else, but actually we've got to keep on task. We've got to use our response inhibition, and we've got to keep going so we get the classroom tidied up so we can all go for lunch. And then in order to do all that, we need Eve Evaluate, who is our metacognition. We've got to be able to be aware of what we're doing so that we can make sure we're keeping on track. So as you can see, in just the simplest thing as tidying up the classroom, we can start pulling in this language about executive function skills development and these cool little characters that can help embody what we're talking about in terms of these skills, to make it much more explicit. And those children who will benefit the most from this work are those who really struggle with these skills, that they haven't developed these skills in the home setting. But all of the children will benefit because all children are still developing these skills all the way until they're 28. So there's no harm in everyone being introduced to these characters and these skills and to be helping to develop them. So just to finish off, I just want to talk a little bit about our services. So we have a one-to-one coaching and PA support that we offer. So we can offer that for people with executive function challenges. We also do training, so I can come into your school setting or your nursery and train teachers. And we have an amazing array of resources like the characters, and there's some colouring pages as well that Prunell's going to pop up there too, so that they can colour in the characters too. And we have an incredible community which we support each other in working in executive function. So that's what we do at Connections in Mind. I want to specifically shine a light on our neuro-inclusive classroom practice, which is 4 levels of qualification that we offer at Connections in Mind. And that takes us through 5 different pedagogical standards, which help us to support the development of executive functions in all learners at all age groups. So the pedagogy is the same no matter what age, but of course it needs to be context dependent. And so we're looking at things like interoception, our ability to understand when we're dysregulated or not regulated, our ability to self-regulate. We're looking at our executive function literacy. We're looking at helping children to come up with strategies that really work for them, and then embedding those habits over the longer term. And those 5 principles apply across different age groups. And you can do level 1 for all of your staff, and then you can select a number of people that you want to do level 2. And then moving on to level 3, they can then start supervising other practitioners, and then level 4, they become a master practitioner and can start training others as well. So that's a really lovely pathway for people who are wanting to develop their understanding of executive functions in early years settings and across the board. So we're going to do a little Q&A now. So please do write any questions that you might have in your Menti, and then that will help us to answer your questions. I'm also going to just launch a little poll, which you can fill out on Zoom if you're interested in any of our services. I've just limited it to a few of the services. We have loads of different things, as I've said, but whether you're interested in executive function coaching for children, for coach training, or for the schools work that we do, we can then send you some follow-up information about those. So just pop any answers in there, and then one of our team will be in contact with you about that. Fantastic. Any questions from the audience? Gosh, there must be some burning questions that people have. So please do type it in, and then they'll pop up on the screen for us. Jenny Duddy has risen her hand, so maybe I can see if I can get, hang on a second. Hang on, I'm just trying to use my cognitive flexibility to find you there, Jenny. Hang on one second. Where are we? Jenny, I think you might have taken your hand down now. Oh, there you are. Did you want to say anything? I'm going to allow you to talk just in case you did want to say anything, Jenny. Oh, it was unintentional. No worries at all. No worries at all. Fantastic. Any questions for anyone? I cannot believe there's no questions at all from any of you. How do you use executive functions with 3-year-olds? So using the characters are so brilliant for executive functions with 3-year-olds, telling them the stories about TikTok Timmy and what he does to wake up the others and keep them all time on time and how he manages his time. And then, all the other different characters. So that's a really great way of building those executive function skills. And they don't have to then learn the longer terminology. They can learn that when they're a bit older, but they can TikTok Timmy, they can really engage with that, and they can have, we have some settings that have like a little cockerel that is like a stuffed animal, or a little model, or sometimes they have a puppet, to kind of bring these to life. Super. What kind of training do you offer for early years classes, mindful that most schools don't have money for training? Yes, this is a real challenge. It is a real challenge, but I think it's really important to remember that I feel that this all comes under safeguarding, because we know that all nurseries and schools aren't psychologically safe for all children, that they are exhibiting distressed behaviour within our settings, which is disrupting learning for them and for their classmates. And so I often say to schools, well, you may not have money for training that's kind of something seen as something as an extra, but in terms of safeguarding, you do have money for that training. So we do go in and we do 90-minute workshops with people, and then we can do the neuro-inclusive classroom practice, which is a whole day. But I think if we put it under that safeguarding piece, then it's amazing what budgets can be found when we do that. Most recent early years classes had 50%, yeah, and that was in mainstream. Yes, absolutely. We're seeing a growing number of children with SEND, but I don't, I'm a bit controversial in this. I don't believe it necessarily that these children are any different, that I believe that we need to adapt our teaching to meet the needs of the children in our communities. And yes, children are changing, but we need to upskill and we need to meet their needs rather than seeing them as, oh, that's something that they need to be in a special school or a special setting for that, because of our environment, because of the nature of, tablets and how busy parents are and all these things, we're seeing all of these symptoms of conditions becoming much more prevalent. But actually, if when we just look at serving the humans in front of us, we can get away from this binary of normal children versus these SEND children, and actually just serve all the children in our care. So I'm a bit controversial when it comes to things like that, but it really does have a huge impact, because when we design our settings to be inclusive for everyone, it reduces down our workload so much more than trying to meet the needs of all these different children separately. Note, I agree as it's needed, as I have two autistic teenagers myself. So many of us do these days. So many of us are neurodivergent and our needs weren't met in school, and we want something different for our children and their futures. And that's right that we demand that. And the more of us that call for that, the more likely the government is to stand up and listen. So thank you for that. Children who have suffered from trauma also display it. Yes, they absolutely do. So that's another part of my talk when I do a longer talk. Yes, there's so much research behind the link between trauma and executive functioning. Also, there's a genetic predisposition too. I don't know about this diagnosis piece again. A diagnosis is only a list of symptoms. It's not actually telling you about the underlying cause. So I don't know about this kind of misdiagnosis. If they have executive function challenges, they have executive function challenges, whether that's caused by trauma or because of something else. It doesn't mean anything different to me. So for me, the training that we offer is much more inclusive than that. We're not looking at, oh, there's this type of child and that type of child. We're looking at all humans and how to meet the need of all humans in every classroom. I hope that makes sense. Fantastic. Yes, and lots of parents have suffered trauma as well, especially with what we're living through at the moment. There's so much trauma around. Thank you, thank you. Okay, super. All right. Um, thank you for this presentation. Very interesting and not covered in schools inset yet. So I do go in. I just spent the early part of this week up in Leeds doing lots of school inset. I do a lot of school inset with mainstream schools, with MATs, with individual local authority controlled schools and with independent schools. So if you are part of one of those, please do invite me in. And if your school says there's no budget for it, look in the safeguarding budget because there's always money there. And this is safeguarding because it's about safeguarding the future of these children and making sure that they have a safe, a psychologically safe place to come into in school. Thank you. Wonderful. Well, we're coming to the end of our time now. If there are no more questions, I'm going to call it a day for today. Please do reach out for us. I think Pranal is putting a link to my Calendly in the chat. So if you want to book in a call to have a chat with me about our services and what we can offer your school setting, then please do. I'd be delighted to chat to you. And I'd be delighted to come in and work with your staff. So thank you again for your time today. Thank you for giving up your lunch break and hope to see you soon. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, everyone. Bye there. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.